In most venues, skeptics have plenty of ammunition to support conservation of energy. In the magnetics venue, they don't have much more than back EMF. Back EMF is a confusing issue because it is typically the buzz phrase used when someone is trying to explain the black magic of magnetism and gets stuck. There are many versions of how the magic works. My best guess is there is no magic involved. Let's start with two things we know for sure. Lorentz equations work, and gyroscopes can eat unlimited amounts of energy. The Lorentz equation defines how electrons react in a magnetic field and is the basis for cathode ray tubes and many other things that absolutely work. Try to overpower a toy gyroscope and you will do lots of mechanical work, but won't slow down the gyroscope a bit. Only friction will do that. I understand the Nobel Committee has a prize reserved for whoever figures out that black magic or the nuclear reaction involved. Lorentz's equation is applied to electric motors based on the electrons will be affected the same by a magnetic field, independent of whether they are in a motor wire or in the vacuum of a cathode ray tube. It makes sense and is strongly supported by the fact that motor forces are accurately predicted by the equation. The black magic is the connection between this force equation and the voltage equation. Conservation of energy requires the two equations be linked. For gyroscopes, spinning kinetic energy and orthogonal torque are not linked, which may be the simple explanation for that magic. So a doctor needs to check the x-rays just to make sure everything is all right. It seems okay to me. We have low flux density areas and high flux density areas where they were expected. I am a little bit surprised that the affected area is so concentrated, so close to the wire. Probably not important. So far, the Lorentz equation gets an absolutely clean bill of health. Practical electric motors fill in the spaces with iron, mostly to reduce the power requirement for the field. The grooves and the spacing between wires is part of the black magic that has always puzzled me. Probably not as important as minimizing the gap to minimize power to field coils. We should get on to the x-rays. Beep, beep, beep. Oops, you guys will need to wait. Houston, we have a problem.
We see the problem, Apollo. We have it on our monitors and have called the magnet boys.
Houston, we were running pre-touchdown checks and the flux monitor shows that our electrons are no longer flowing in a magnetic field. This can't be good. Please advise.
The magnet boys are scratching their heads. They want to know if there are any indications that you're going to crash.
Houston, we were kind of hoping you guys would provide a little insight on that subject. Negative on the other indications.
The magnet boys have conferred, and they agree that you should be okay. Flux is gone, but you still have back EMF.
Houston, that doesn't sound too convincing. Do we have a backup plan?
Affirmative, Apollo. The magnet boys say if you crash, they owe you a lunch. Over and out.
Houston.
Apollo, one more thing. Your wife called. All your life insurances have been canceled. What should she do?
Well, now that's taken care of. Isn't back EMF wonderful magic? Practical motor reactions cannot be Lorentz force reactions. The flowing electrons are exposed to no magnetic flux. This configuration is not quite the electric motor illustrated, but the actual forces are well defined. If not Lorentz, to what else can the forces be attributed? With the help of Mission Control, we have busted the myth that electrons behave the same in motor wires as in your TV picture tube. Motor forces will be easier to understand if you know how to read the X-rays. X-ray reading and fringe effect black magic can both be explained with this model consisting of 2 magnets and 5 blocks of iron available from Home Depot. Unfortunately, to fully understand fringing, a bit of Cincopetrium is required for iron block 3. Cincopetrium is not available at the Home Depot or any other store. That is not a showstopper. It just means we have to substitute a flywheel in practical applications. The first concept to understand is lines of flux are endless loops. In accordance with conservation of energy, the sum of the forces along the lines of any and all loops is 0. The total energy in all these loops is about the same, but concentrated in the red areas. But the forces along the lines are not constant, like Newtonian forces pulling on a string. Block 1 illustrates that. We know that block 1 will be attracted to the upper or lower surface unless it is placed exactly in the middle, as is block number 2. There is no magic about fringing. Differing forces along the lines of flux and the X-rays explain it fully. All of the magnetic energy is along the lines of flux. Perpendicular forces are involved, but they are independent of energy along the lines. Remember the gyroscope where the kinetic energy was not changed when perpendicular torque was applied? Cincopetrium surrounding block 3 takes advantage of that law of nature. It is anisotropic like the rotor in Murray's generator and the cores of most transformers. It is a theoretical laminated stack of air and super air. The super air has 1,000 times the reluctance of regular air, the same reluctance ratio as in common steel lamination stacks. Lamination stacks with these high reluctance ratios result in nearly equal forces at both ends of a line of flux. Block 3 would freely move up and down. The fringe force equation derived from conserved energy quantifies the differential attraction between the upper and lower surfaces. Ironically, measuring the spaces between lines of flux is a formidable task, so we need to trust the conservation of energy equations. Conservation of energy along the lines of flux does not indicate any perpendicular energy. Can we also trust that? Since we don't have enough Cincopetrium to make a working motor, we will need a flywheel to conserve energy for any block moving up and down to take advantage of the perpendicular forces that require no energy. Let's check with Mission Control. Houston, any updates from the Magnet Boys?
Negative, Apollo. The Magnet Boys are still scratching heads.
Houston, we have some ideas up here. Can they help us with the forces between lines of flux?
Negative, Apollo. Over and out.
I think we're on our own.
Apollo, I have some good news. The Magnet Boys have sent Mikey to get pointed hats and magic wands. They have agreed to stay till 6 p.m. if we buy them dinner. We are trying to get that approved.
I know for sure now that we're on our own. Let's work on the perpendicular forces that we saw earlier with the motor wires. More iron bars from Home Depot are required, and the X-rays tell it all. Let's see if we read the X-rays the same way. Flux lines cross the gap and forces are perpendicular. The relative size of the perpendicular force vector arrows indicates what I have measured. It seems like the flux is contained in the gaps, with containment on one side by the movable bar and on the other side by the stator. The magical force we couldn't understand is simple equal and opposite forces containing a magnetic field in a gap. The only surprise for me is where the peak forces occur. I thought they would occur at the corners and not on the opposing flat surfaces. Maybe the X-ray machine is suffering from back EMF starvation or avian flu. Time is unfortunately up, so you will need to wait for part 2 to see how these pieces of the puzzle fit together to make self-running motors and even more valuable field effect devices partially described before. You will also learn the fate of the Apollo crew.